My name is Lauren. I work with the Queensland Transport and Logistics Council. We like acronyms, QTLC we call ourselves. Just a note, first of all, to say that we are recording this and it's our intention to edit it. We'll cut out the questions at the end, but we want to make the recording available to other participants who couldn't join us today and potentially online, because we've got some exciting information to share and we want to maximise the learnings that we've got here today and the people whose knowledge we've invited. So that's our intention today. We're looking to run for an hour and 45 minutes, preferably shorter if we can, and we'll kick off now. So Queensland Transport and Logistics Council is hosting the webinar today, and I think I speak on behalf of all of us to say how exciting it is to have such a great lineup of speakers. We've got a couple from the states who are leaders in field, and they've done some amazing things in their organisations and in transitioning fleets across. So we're going to pick their brains today and super excited about them. In the audience, it's a bit of a unique set of people. Today, the audience is freight hubs in Queensland, significant freight hubs. And we think that that's probably a group that is under-supported and underutilised, given the immense significance that they will play in transitioning fleets in the future. And that's why we've pulled you all together today with these speakers. We'll talk a bit more on that soon. So for those of you who don't know, the Queensland Transport and Logistics Council is an independent body which was established by Queensland Department of Transport and Main Roads to provide government advice on supply chains, policy, freight investment and infrastructure. We're not strictly a membership body, so we're not beholden to answer to anyone in particular or to sell a product or behave in a particular way. Our remit is really to support the Queensland freight sector, and that's a pretty noble and exciting thing to be able to do. Our board is particularly committed to transitioning fleets and hubs as you are in the transition that is ahead. And from a technology agnostic view, we don't care whether the answer is hydrogen or EV or some sort of bio solution. We want you to be able to do it in a fashion that makes sense economically and technically. And to this end, they've agreed to assist you in that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the webinar later. In the interim, I'd like to introduce and hand over to Nathan Gore-Brown. You can see there. He's going to facilitate today's webinar for us, and he's absolutely ideal for today's job because two things. I guess he is the most passionate person I know about zero emission freight. And secondly, he can talk underwater, and that's a particular skill that I don't have. Nathan is an automotive sector specialist with lots of experience in light vehicles, heavy vehicles, mining and construction. Over the last 5 years, he has focused on the electrification and decarbonisation of fleets. So he moved from a sales role in Tesla actually to movement of bespoke consultancy as a consultant, where he's now working on freight decarbonisation and electrification, bus, and we'll talk a bit more about that as we go on. But thank you, Nathan, and thank you, everyone.
Thanks very much, Lauren, and thanks for that intro. Yes, as Lauren said, I'm here to help you navigate your way through this space of zero-emission trucks and freight. And today we have a number of speakers that will give us insight to that, which is on your doorstep as we speak. We'd really love your interaction today, and so we'd like you to pose questions throughout the process and throughout the speakers. While the speakers are in full flow, we'd like you to provide your questions into the chat. So you've got a little chat bit at the top of your screen, opens up a small window, and if you just pop some thoughts in there, and I will curate those and support the speakers to take those questions as they come up for you. Or if you want to hold your question to our Q&A session, which will happen at the end of each of our speakers, you could raise your hand and you can pose that question live. So that's what we're planning on doing. To get us going, I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker. Bill Van Amberg is from CalStart and Drive to Zero. Bill is a leader in reducing emissions from road transport in the US, having co-founded CalStart, a catalyst for so much of the change there. Bill has expanded his focus and influence to spearhead the global Drive to Zero initiative, which he'll let us know more about this morning. I'd like to welcome Bill all the way from California to tell us more about the zero emissions progress he is witnessing in heavy vehicle fleets across there. Bill.
Nathan, thank you so much. And it's just so great to be together with this group as you really look at what you can do at your ports, your freight hubs, airports, and along your transportation systems in Australia. And I think there is a tremendous opportunity in the entire nation now, not just in Queensland, for making this shift. Let me kind of walk through the lessons we've learned and the reality of the technology as it pertains today in zero emissions. I will, we went through this exercise before, so bear with me. I will try to share, tab, hopefully, which is not coming up yet. It's always amazing to go through this process and to try to make sure that you've got the right tab for what you're trying to do pop up at the right time. And now I think I've gotten it. So I think you'll bear with me. There's about a 4-second delay here from the States before you see the image. But I do want to share what we've done at CalSTART in zero emission technology. And Nathan, if you could confirm that my screen has popped up okay for everyone.
Yeah, you're looking good. Thanks, Bill.
Super. And kind of share with you as we walk through this, what has led to this global program we have called the Global Commercial Vehicle Drive to Zero, really pushing and leaning into this opportunity for zero emission technology to rapidly transition and start to take over the entire freight sector. So what I'd like to walk through very quickly today is CalSTART and its global role, the zero emission momentum that we're seeing, the reality, what's driving it, the critical steps to growing the market, and then kind of the growth path and the road ahead. So first of all, just really quickly to give you some background on CalSTART. CalSTART launched in 1992 in California and has really grown since then. It's more than 300 different companies, really the leading edge companies, vehicle manufacturers, suppliers, infrastructure providers, and agencies around the United States, but now increasingly around the world, really working together to build this clean transportation technologies marketplace and accelerate the uptake of these technologies and to do what it takes to make that happen. We launched in California in '92, but we are a transnational organization in the States and have now opened a European office and actually have operations around the world now through our Global Drive to Zero program, including in China, in India, in South America, and with some contact with our good friends down under. Now, the Drive to Zero program is our big extension into the global work. And this is taking kind of a theory of change that we developed in California in particular as kind of the test bed launch site for the United States for these technologies. And then we're able to find some commonalities of how to use that structure to inform and assist global partners. Common goals, and also to get our deployments at similar timelines so we could share in the supply chain volumes that would create. So let me tell you first about what's going on just in terms of the reality of the technology. Just last week in Southern California, we held a major zero emission truck showcase and ride and drive. And I think this was really important just for people to feel the reality of the technology. Every OEM, every truck maker in North America and Europe is now making zero emission products, low volumes, but they're into the marketplace. And that includes everything from the largest tractor trailer rigs, mostly for use in regional heavy applications, down through delivery and other kinds of step vans and those types of vehicles. We had 38 different products, more than 500 fleets showed up to test drive and feel those vehicles. So the momentum is real, and this is something we've fought very hard on in the last few years, is to show the reality of the marketplace, to put money into validating the first prototype products, and then to help the OEMs and the truck makers to sell their products with incentive programs. So we're seeing in those big heavy tractor models or moving cargo around big regions like some of your cities. These vehicles are now in production from major manufacturers and from some emerging manufacturers. And as we measured this, we have a tool, it's on our website, the Zero Emission Technology Inventory. We're actually measuring a 26% growth despite the pandemic in the volumes of these vehicles. There'll be more than 500 zero emission heavy duty market products by 2023. Now, we follow a theory of change on this, which is really what we call it a beachhead, which is a term that I find that many younger people don't really know, but I remember kind of how it came out of World War II, and that was you established a first location and then you built out from that. And in heavy duty electrification, the first beachhead is transit buses. And then it has steadily moved because those technologies that drive those buses, the powertrains, the motors, the battery packs are highly transferable. They've moved into other applications that have higher volumes, heavier weights, and need lower costs. We're now at the point, when you can see this red line on the screen, where we're just now moving past regional heavy trucks and moving into longer haul trucks that can operate between cities on corridors. And this is the new high ground. Now, why is this urgent? We all know the answer to this question, but I think this recent report that came out of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has been so frightening and instructive. We need to actually make changes in the next 5 years. This isn't just, well, let's do something 20 years out or maybe in 10 years. We actually have to start bending the needle on these emissions now. And around the world in many other regions, not maybe as much in Australia, air quality also needs to be addressed, and zero emission technologies do that. California has really set a standard that is really starting to drive the world. There is this thing called the Advanced Clean Truck Rule that has in place now in California. In 2024 and beyond, it will start requiring fixed numbers that grow year over year of zero emission trucks to be sold, aiming towards moving to 100% of all trucks. As often happens with a California regulation, it is now starting to sweep across the United States, and it is also being taken up by nations around the world. There are now 15 states in the United States that have adopted that same rule to be 30% zero emissions by 2030 and to be 100% essentially by 2040. And now 16 nations around the world have also adopted that. That's important, and we called this the Global Memorandum of Understanding, or Global MOU, because it now starts to send really clear signals to manufacturers, to fleets and others about the direction the technology is going, why we need to do it, and it can help focus investment. It sends a market signal that's really powerful. But it's a big lift over these next few years. And one of the things that we have learned in our work, in not just in California, but certainly there, just pass regulations and walk away and dust off your hands and think you've done the job. What we really need is to build a full ecosystem that will include investments in infrastructure around fast charge hubs and corridors. It will involve incentives in the early market to help assist the launch so fleets can purchase the early vehicles that do tend to be a little more expensive. And it will include working with electric utilities and others to really make sure that they can put in place the infrastructure on time and have good pricing for the fuel. These are all some of the things in that ecosystem that does need to be established. Now, in the United States, we've been pretty effective at setting up these large incentive programs, and one of the newest ones we've launched is called Energize, which I think is kind of a fun little term, but essentially it's for putting in infrastructure. One of the things we've learned, and will be instructive, I think, as you look into this, it isn't just the trucks. You really have to make sure you've got the infrastructure. And frankly, it has a longer lead time than delivery of the trucks. So for fleets, for ports, for facilities that are thinking about electrification, now is the time to start thinking about whether you're going to do hydrogen fuel cells or battery electric trucks. You need to start thinking about your fueling infrastructure build out now in advance. In the United States, there has been money finally that has been applied to this through what's called the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And that will start putting money into infrastructure all around the United States in the next few years. And these will start to satisfy what we think are some of the big barriers to deployment. High upfront cost with things like supporting policy and also incentives. Limited available vehicle inventory, that's really starting to be addressed, particularly as markets demand the truck makers bring what they know they can already sell and build. Infrastructure, of course, is a big one, and then setting up supporting use profiles so that people can actually get a benefit of using these vehicles. But I would just share with you that as we've been looking, and multiple studies have looked at this, the total cost of ownership, if you will, the business case for zero emission vehicles has actually gotten quite good. And particularly in repetitive, high use urban cycles. And that includes the big tractor trailer rigs that are running goods and food and cargo around our regions, out of ports to distribution centers and the like. The business case is actually really strong for high utilization of these vehicles. And we think for all vehicles, there will be a full business case by 2030 in almost all markets of the world, where it will be competitive, if not a better business case than diesel. So we're already now looking, because of that, at long-range corridors. The studies are underway and the first funding is starting to be applied. So we're starting to move out from the proof of concept we've done around regional trucks and the need to build out regional charging to now looking at long-range charging. In fact, today, I'm not in Southern California. I happen to be up the northwest coast of the United States in Portland, Oregon. And that's one of the prime corridors in the United States that we're looking at, the I-5 corridor up the west coast to Canada. These technologies are at that point where they can now accomplish this by driving 200, 300 plus miles before needing to be recharged. So I would just close with this, this look at the future. As we have studied through our Global Drive to Zero program, we started with that thing I called the beachhead chart, really getting the market momentum and the vehicles out into the world. Now that that's happened, now that these are products that you can actually buy, at least in key markets, these are the next steps that we see over the next 20 years as we move towards 2040. We need to get aligned policies and regulations in key regions like Queensland and elsewhere around the world that are moving towards the same targets on roughly the same timelines. We need to start getting these long haul corridor segments launched. It won't be every truck, but on certain really high use corridors between major cities, and you have some of those on your coasts in Australia. We need to make sure our cities double down on electrification, because that's just a really conducive duty cycle to where electrification works. And then we start to need to build out our national backbones for the infrastructure so that by 2040, we actually have bent the needle on climate change, and we actually have these very powerful, highly effective, and good business case solutions available everywhere. So with that, I will stop my presentation. I have not checked the chat while I've been chatting, but okay. Nathan, I'll go back to you and see what questions people may have.
That's fantastic, Bill. Thank you so much. I think that was brilliant insight into where the world is and where we might be in relation to it. We haven't had a question come in yet, so I've got one that I might kick you off with. But if you've got a question out there, please feel free to raise your hand with the up in the top bar, and I'll definitely come to you. In fact, it looks like Craig has put his hand up, and I'd quite happily have Craig come in with that first question. So Craig, if you'd like to unmute and ask Bill your question.
Sure, Bill. Thank you for that. That was great. Just one question around electric versus hydrogen. You obviously focus purely on electric. Do you think that's the way the market's going to head? You don't think there'll be a sort of hydrogen market, or we'll sort of hit electric and that's the way we'll go?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. And first of all, I think nobody in the world should say either or. It's going to be a complementary energy system that we're going to find. Battery electric and hydrogen systems are going to be complementary, both in our energy system and in our transportation system. I did focus on battery electric because they are the first out of the gate. And frankly, they are making some of the fastest progress. But we're seeing now in 2022, late this year, and in 2023 and the years beyond, the first hydrogen fuel cell trucks starting to hit the road. We've seen it in transit. And in the United States, about 10% of the transit buses actually are hydrogen fuel cells, because the transit operators felt that they needed, these are people who are driving 200 to 300 mile routes in the United States every day, and they didn't want to stop for opportunity charging. So we're going to see the first long haul fuel cell trucks coming out from Nikola. Hyundai is testing theirs in California, and a couple of others. So I guess what I would share with you is, don't delay waiting for the perfect. Start moving forward with what's available. When you really get down to it, the underlying powertrain, the motor, the battery pack, the power electronics, exactly the same. So the only difference is, do you want to store the energy in the chemical batteries, or do you want to generate it on board with hydrogen fuel cells? And I think that's going to be based on application. I do think hydrogen is going to be really good for extreme duty cycles, for ultra long range or high linger time where you don't want to stop for recharging. There may be applications around ports where you can actually really invest in the infrastructure, one piece of very expensive infrastructure for a lot of vehicles. So I think what you want to do is start exploring what's going to be the best fit. I think for regional truck transport around cities, battery electric will probably do the job, but I think there's plenty of other applications, and we should not view this as a fight, but a complement between the two.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. And I'd like to turn to Andrew Rankin. He's got a question there for us, and then we might just take this one and we'll move on to our next speaker afterwards. Andrew.
Oh, thanks very much, Bill. Most interesting presentation. The question I have is, how is the US doing this in comparison to Europe? I've always thought or understood, and I don't know whether this is correct, that's why I'm asking the question, that the Europe is ahead of everybody in this space. Is that the case?
I got to tell you, you know who's ahead in this space? China. China is kicking the world's behind. I won't use worse language than that. But the three really big launch nodes in the world right now for zero emission tech is Asia, China in particular, Western Europe, and California. I would say Europe is ahead of the United States without doubt. I think California and Europe are comparable, and then there are other regions of the US that are doing some things. And then China's just got deployment volumes like nobody's business. But I think those are the areas where there's an awful lot of sharing going on best practices. But I think the technology now is so transferable, there's no reason for anybody to stay in the lead for any long time. Now it's a question of will, deployment, and infrastructure more than anything else.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, for that question. It was great. Thank you, Bill, for that. That was really great. And we'll all keep an eye on what Drive to Zero is forging, and seeing that rapid progress coming out of California's leadership with the like of the ACT program and so on. Thanks very much.
We look forward to working with you anytime and be a resource to you.
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant. I'm sure all the team will be looking at your websites and so on. Thanks, Bill. Our next speaker has been at the forefront of road freight decarbonisation in Australia for more than a decade. He and his team, of which I am a member, have worked on all aspects of zero emission vehicles, from policy to testing vehicles in the field. He has decades of experience in heavy vehicle engineering and working with fleets to make change in their moving away from fossil fuels. I'd like to introduce you to Mark Jerrick from Movement. He's going to give us an overview of a paper he and the team authored for QTLC on zero emission trucks in Queensland. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Nathan. And thanks also to Bill for that great global picture of this wave of zero emission trucks that are coming. I'm going to focus more on the local uptake of those vehicles, based on some work that we did with QTLC earlier this year, and you can find that paper published on the QTLC website. And it's specifically focused on the barriers to uptake for zero emission vehicles, and we think those barriers are really important because that's what's constraining the market here in Australia. So I'm sharing my screen. Tell me if you can't see that, but I'll skip right into it because
you're all good, Mark. Keep going.
Few slides to get through, and if you've got any questions, I'm happy to revisit some of the slides if we need to. So quick overview. I'll start with an overview of the report and what we found. So the zero emission, I guess the scope of the zero emission trucks we looked at were battery electric trucks and hydrogen fuel cell electric trucks. We didn't look at renewable fuels, combustion fuels, because they still have tailpipe emissions. Our scope was those two technologies. I guess one of the challenges of zero emission trucks is that diesel is a pretty good fuel for trucks if you take away if you ignore the emissions component. It's versatile, it's ubiquitous, you can find it anywhere. Until the last few months, it has been relatively cheap as well. And all of the alternatives have some level of let's call it a constraint or concessions to be made, and there isn't really a single alternative. Going to the question we had a second ago about hydrogen or battery electric, each technology has its own advantages, as do biofuels as well. So one of the things that Bill mentioned, and I'm going to talk about as well, was despite those limitations, there are applications, what Bill called beachhead applications, where zero emission trucks are cost competitive even today, we found in our analysis from a local context, and we'll talk about some of those applications. But I guess the critical thing is that would indicate that the uptake should be higher, and what we're seeing is that it's not higher. And part of the reason for that is there's a whole bunch of obvious barriers around price of the vehicles, availability of those vehicles, and also the fueling and charging infrastructure. And we also identified a whole range of other barriers that we call market maturity barriers, which I'll go into, which are constraining the uptake of those vehicles. Very quickly, I guess one of the challenges is that to overcome those barriers, there needs to be more collaboration. The diesel market is pretty well established. There's a lot of competition in that space between manufacturers and fuel suppliers, and the lessons from past failures of alternative fuels in Australia is you need to coordinate and collaborate in the supply chain in order to increase adoption. And then we came up with a series of recommendations for different stakeholder groups. So that's the 1.5 minute summary of all of the report. I'm now going to do a bit of a deep dive into some of those elements, just to give you a bit more detail. So I'll start with the why. Why do we need zero emission trucks? This is a very, very simple question with a simple answer, and it's in the name, zero emissions. So we have a huge challenge. Transport in Australia is about 20%, just under 20% of carbon emissions, and we know we need to reduce those because of climate change. Our carbon targets are referenced, if you look at this graph, on 2005 emissions levels. And these different coloured lines just represent different types of vehicles. So down here in the black, you've got cars, blue is light commercial vehicles, and then the red and the yellow is different types of trucks. And you can see here that the trajectory for our emissions from trucks is increasing rapidly and is projected to continue increasing all the way out to 2030. And yet here's our Paris target down here. So we're not going to get anywhere near that. Now, every sector has got to pull its weight. We know that there'll be different reductions in different sectors, but the picture doesn't look that great for transport. And because of the increase in freight task, population growth, and pretty flat productivity in trucks over the last decade, really switching fuels and switching technologies is one of the only viable pathways. So that's the rationale behind why you would want to do something with zero emission trucks. So our approach here was looking at how those zero emission technologies might be adopted into the market. And as I said before, we know that diesel is a pretty competitive fuel and very difficult to displace. And we know that because of those specific attributes of different technologies, they'll be taken up in different applications. As Bill said, those beachhead applications will adopt them. They're differentially suitable in different applications. So our analysis in the report that we did started with the total truck market. You can see up here on the slide. If you imagine that as all of the truck sales in the market that are diesel at the moment, we know that the technical suitability of different fuels is a subset out of that total market, and that's talking about payload capability, driving range, those sort of attributes. We then know that even within that subset, these new technologies are going to work in only some of those applications from a financial perspective. So those highly utilised trucks, but not too utilised. So you can't have an electric truck doing 1,500 kilometres a day, for example. And so, and then within that subset, you also look at the model availability and the preferences, the buying preferences of different players in the market, and you end up with this orange box here, that's the commercial potential of zero emission trucks. But actually, when we look at the sales in Australia, at least, certainly not looking at the US in this case, the sales are much lower than what their commercial viability would suggest. And so starting to look at how do we expand those sales out to reach their commercial potential, and ultimately, as the technology improves, broadly out into this total truck market. So we did that segmented analysis and looked at those, what we call sweet spots, what Bill was calling beachhead applications. And what we found was battery electric trucks are highly suitable in a couple of applications: urban distribution of freight and low frequency garbage compactors, so rubbish trucks as we know them. Those low frequency ones are the industrial ones with the the front lift industrial bins, for example. Less suitable, but certainly still viable. Battery electric trucks can also be used in regional haul, and again, Bill mentioned that, as well as some applications of curbside rubbish collection, so residential waste. And then fuel cell electric trucks were pretty much technically suitable everywhere, but price is a big barrier, and I'll focus on that, or let's call it costs. So these total cost of ownership graphs are similar to what Bill presented, but these are adapted for our local market here. And what we found was, for an urban delivery, even a heavy rigid diesel over here, so costs split between capital, servicing and fuel, a battery electric truck is competitive today and certainly by 2025 on a total cost of ownership basis. So if you ignore the price and you focus on the amortization of the other costs as well over the life of the vehicle, it's cost competitive. Fuel cell hydrogen, not quite yet. And if you look at another application, and let's say this is regional haul, which is probably not where people think of battery electric trucks, but that's where we're seeing them start to emerge as well. Even in that application, you can see that a battery electric truck is about line ball with a diesel in TCO, and again, fuel cell electric trucks sometime in the future. So I guess that goes to one of those questions that was asked, which was, is the future hydrogen? Well, ultimately, without some kind of subsidy in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years, price is going to be the biggest barrier, or costs, I should say. So that cost competitiveness would indicate that fleets should be switching right now. And we then went to the market and did some rounds of consultation with QTLC to identify why that's not happening. And so I won't focus on this too much, but we did 3 workshops. We spoke to just over a dozen fleets, a range of industry associations and other suppliers to identify why that wasn't happening. And what they told us is represented here on the graph. These are some of the barriers that they identified preventing the transition to zero emission trucks. And we've categorized those as technical or operational barriers, financial barriers, so costs and vehicle price. And then there was this whole suite of, let's call them soft barriers, or what we call market maturity barriers, and they're color-coded blue. And they're the sort of things that the typical things that you might hear that are called the yeah buts. Yes, it's financially viable, but I don't buy that brand. But I'm worried about the reliability. But the regulations prevent me from switching. And so, if you add up all of those kind of market maturity barriers, you end up with that being the biggest category of barriers that's preventing this switch. But in summary, what fleets and others were looking for was more financial support from government, more models to be available so they had choice in the market, and more information to overcome some of those perceptions of zero emission technologies and the challenges. And the costs, the total cost of ownership is one of those. Pretty much everybody thinks that battery electric trucks are more expensive over their life, and we showed that that wasn't the case in some applications. So taking that as a way to prompt action, we took those barriers and came up with a series of recommendations that actually address some of what each stakeholder group has influence over. And so you can see there's some recommendations there for government, for suppliers in the industry, for fleets themselves, and for truck manufacturers. And I'm not going to go into all of these, but there are some pretty obvious ones here around, governments providing support for fleets to switch, people in the freight supply chain, so that could be precincts or other players in the industry, actually providing favourable conditions, and that might be favourable rates for finance. So we know that there are support mechanisms through clean energy finance here in Australia, and fleets are trying to understand what the the tipping point is for them when they switch, and manufacturers can actually help them do that. So the report's got a lot more actions for each of those stakeholder groups. I guess there were two critical elements that we also identified. One was that there are some foundations missing in the Australian market. And one of those is we don't speak in a common language when we talk about different applications or duty cycle or beachhead type of applications. And there's a need to address that. And we're doing some work as a way of starting that conversation and actually helping to identify what is the specific application and the characteristics of that will identify which applications zero emission trucks are suitable for. And then there were what we would call a couple of accelerator opportunities. So what we've seen work in other markets, two of those that we identified were grants programs that actually fund fleets or fund energy companies to help switch to these technologies. And the other one was using precincts or freight hubs as a way to catalyze action in the transition. So we know that trucks frequent some sites, whether that's ports or airports or markets or whatever it is, and there's an opportunity there to actually reach a lot of fleets to help that transition. And I guess that's what a lot of today is about. It's this focus on zero emission precincts and hubs. And I know the next two speakers are going to focus heavily on that, so I'm not going to steal their thunder. But happy to answer any questions on. I know that was a very quick run through, but within 10 minutes, it's about all we can do. Happy to answer any questions if you like, or you can download the report.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Yeah, that report is out there. Got a couple of questions that have popped through. Got a great one here from Marty. So discussing your insights on the total cost of ownership. And the question is, what exactly about fuel cells is most expensive? Is the hydrogen availability costly as well as the fuel cells themselves?
Yeah. So if you think of the supply chain for the hydrogen, there's the hydrogen production, then there's the hydrogen distribution, and then there's the vehicles themselves. And we know that each one of those elements is more expensive than diesel. Certainly at the moment, from our research, that's going to be the case all the way out to 2025 and 2030 even. So producing the hydrogen, we have a lot of investment going on in that in Australia at the moment to try to get to a target price. But even if you could achieve that target price of Angus Taylor's $2 a kilo, for example, the distribution of the hydrogen then adds about the same into the mix. And then the vehicle cost is significantly higher. It's 2 to 3 times at least the price of a diesel truck. So you've got this cost impost at every part of the chain, and we don't see that being price competitive or cost competitive without massive amounts of government subsidisation, which is exactly what we're seeing at the moment in Australia.
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
If that answers the question.
It does. I think it does. It covers that off pretty well. Rishi's just asked a quick one here around what do you see as the role for drop-in diesel and how might that fit in this space? Maybe what are the brief barriers around that?
Volume of supply. It's a very similar situation to if you're talking about renewable diesel, whether that covers biofuels or synthetically produced diesel. We think that's a big opportunity, and particularly in Australia where we don't have so much focus on air quality problems. We recently did a paper on diesel replacement in agriculture, and we identified that as a huge opportunity. And I think it's the same with road transport, but there's just not as much investment going on. And if you compare the investment in hydrogen with renewable diesel, for example, there's a multiple of 10 or 100 to 1 in terms of the investment. So I think it's an opportunity, but particularly in those areas where we're going to start to focus on the pollutant emissions from tailpipe, renewable diesel isn't going to fix that problem.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. What we do is we'll move on. I'm going to provide Regan an answer to his question in the chat as we move into the next speaker. But thank you very much for that, Mark, and exploring those couple of questions. Next, I'd like to welcome Heather Tomley from the Port of Long Beach in California. Heather is the MD of the Managing Director of Planning and Environmental Affairs at the port. And Heather and the team have developed comprehensive programs for all aspects of sustainability at the port, including a benchmark clean truck program. The Port of Long Beach provides its users with the best possible environment to foster the transition to zero emission trucks, and Heather's going to tell us all about it. Thanks for joining us, Heather.
Thank you, Nathan, and thank you everyone for inviting me today to participate. Let's see, I might have just done that incorrectly. Let me make sure I am sharing. Can you see the screen?
Yeah, that's looking great.
Okay, perfect. So what I wanted to talk with everyone today is about some of the activities that we've been involved with at the Port of Long Beach, and specifically the work that we've been doing related to the transition to zero emissions and zero emissions for trucking. First, what I wanted to provide, though, in case those of you are not as familiar with the Port of Long Beach, I wanted to give a little bit of background of who we are. We're a landlord port, and we lease out our land to terminal operators who conduct the business of moving the cargo. And we serve as a major gateway for trade in and out of the United States. A little less than 40% of all of the containerized cargo coming into the United States comes through the San Pedro Bay complex, which is the Port of Long Beach and the Port of Los Angeles, which are co-located in Southern California. We're a major economic engine, and about $200 billion worth of trade goes through the port each year. And we're also responsible for about 1 in 20 jobs across Southern California. East Asian trade accounts for about 90% of the shipments through the port, and China is our top trading partner. Australia is also an important partner. Australia is ranked 9th for TEU imports into the United States and 6th for TEU exports through our port. We've also been experiencing significant growth in cargo volumes, especially over the past few years with the pandemic effects. Last year was our busiest year, where we moved 9.38 million TEUs. And this trend appears to be continuing. Last month, we had our second busiest month in our 111-year history, where our operators and dock workers processed nearly 891,000 TEUs for that month. Also, with the Port of Los Angeles, they are the busiest container port in the United States, and last year they moved 10 million TEU. So the combined total moved through the San Pedro Bay Port Complex in 2021 was around 20 million TEUs. And so for comparison with Port of Brisbane, I saw on the website the cargo volumes there is about 1.3 million TEU. So the San Pedro Bay Complex is pretty significant in size and trade volume. The economic success that we enjoy doesn't come without a cost to air quality and to the health of our local communities. And in the early 2000s, we were hearing a lot of concerns and outcry from the local communities. We were seeing significant cargo volume increases at the time, and the local communities and the air quality regulators were highly concerned that not enough was being done to mitigate the impacts, the environmental impacts that were associated with all of those cargo volume increases. And so in response, Port of Long Beach in 2005 adopted the first green port policy, which represented a fundamental shift in our approach and prioritized the need to address environmental impacts in all aspects of our work. And so looking across the board at what we could do to address air, water, sediment and soil impacts, make sure that we're protecting habitat for wildlife. And also an important component was the relationship that we had with the community, and really making sure that we were listening to their concerns and addressing their concerns and being more transparent in our approach with them going forward. In a follow-up effort the following year, in 2006, the Port of Long Beach, together with Port of Los Angeles, jointly released our first Clean Air Action Plan. And this was our strategy document where we focused on reducing health risk and our fair share of air pollutants across all port operational source categories, while at the same time supporting the workforce, fostering strong partnerships with our stakeholders, building trust with the communities, and balancing the need to remain economically competitive and put the port in a position that we could continue to grow and modernize our facilities. We've continued to move forward with implementing the Clean Air Action Plan since it was first adopted, and we've updated it as well. In 2017, we produced our most recent update where we identified new strategies and identified our most aggressive clean air goals yet. By 2030, we established a goal to get to 100% zero emissions for all cargo handling equipment, and by 2035 to transition all heavy-duty trucks entering and exiting the ports to be zero emissions. And we've had a lot of success with our programs. Since the Clean Air Action Plan was adopted, we've reduced diesel particulates from port operations by 90%, nitrogen oxides by 62%, sulfur oxides by 97%, and greenhouse gases, which were not a focus of our efforts in the very beginning, and were introduced in our 2017 Clean Air Action Plan update. We've also been able to reduce greenhouse gases by 10%. And all of this has been achieved while cargo volumes have increased by 21% compared to where we were in 2005. We also met our emission reduction goals that we'd established for 2023. We met those 3 years early in 2020. But our work isn't done. Southern California continues to have some of the worst air quality in the nation, and climate change impacts are an increasing and critical threat. We're therefore continuing to do what we can as a port authority to implement clean air strategies and move forward with the changes that we need to see from port-related operations. One of our key strategies has been the Clean Trucks program, which we first established in 2008. Even though trucks are not the biggest source of emissions at the ports, trucks have always been a major focus of concern by the local communities. They're very visible, they travel through the communities, they travel near homes, and so we've put a lot of effort and emphasis on addressing emissions from trucks. In our initial program, our goal was to phase out the oldest, dirtiest trucks servicing the ports and bring them up to the latest, cleanest engine standards. And the port isn't a regulatory agency. We have limitations on our jurisdiction and our authority, but we were able to proceed with implementing a progressive ban on the older diesel trucks, some of which at the time were as much as 50 years old. And we banned them from entering the ports by not allowing them to register for service unless they met the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency engine standards for 2007 or better. We also at the time charged a fee of $35 per TEU on older trucks until they met the standard and used the money to provide incentives for the purchase of cleaner trucks. This effort is still lauded as one of the most successful efforts to reduce emissions. We were able to transition more than 16,000 trucks in about 4 years, and that resulted in a 97% reduction in diesel particulate matter emissions from truck operations at the port. Even with this success, however, trucks still remain our largest source of greenhouse gases and the second highest source of nitrogen oxide emissions. As I mentioned in the 2017 Clean Air Action Plan update, we set a goal of 100% zero emission trucks by 2035. And we're committed to do this by building on our earlier successful efforts through collaboration, working with the trucking and port industry and air quality agencies, and seeking to minimize economic impacts to independent owner operators, and disruptions to service. The actions that we're taking at the ports are focused on proceeding with strategies like technology demonstrations, new registration requirements for trucks to enter port service, the introduction of a clean truck fund rate, and funding programs to support the transition. A key challenge that's unique this time around is the technology transition. The previous program achieved the results by changing out trucks to newer diesel models. It wasn't a big transitional change from the previous generation of trucks. We were just moving forward with trucks, same technology standard, but moving forward with cleaner engine emission models. Now we're asking the industry to change technologies to batteries or fuel cells, and these technologies are still emerging and need to be developed and tested in these operations. We've been participating in funding and managing technology demonstrations with manufacturers and operators to understand how these trucks can perform in day-to-day use, and additional enhancements that are needed to make sure that they can meet the operational needs. We're also committed to conducting technology feasibility assessments and updating those every 3 years so that we can track the status of the technology development, including evaluating the technical viability, commercial availability, operational capability, economic factors, including cost, as was mentioned in Mark's presentation, and also infrastructure availability throughout the region. Our latest draft assessment on trucks will be released in the next few months and will help to continue to inform our progress. The port has also adopted policies and requirements to transition to cleaner trucks. In October 2018, we adopted a registration requirement for any new trucks entering the Port Drayage Truck Registry to be 2014 model year or newer to ensure that they meet the latest United States Environmental Protection Agency engine standards and also efficiency improvements. In May of this year, out of the 21,710 trucks that are registered, we had 10,055 model year 2014 or newer trucks performing 58% of the moves. So since we adopted the new registration requirement, we have seen significant transition to these trucks. One of the more controversial requirements that we adopted was our Clean Truck Fund rate, which charges $10 per TEU on cargo that's moved by truck in and out of the port, with exemptions for zero emission trucks and limited exemptions for ultra low NOx trucks, which are fueled with natural gas. The rate started on April 1st of this year, and between the two ports, we're on track for collecting $90 million in this first year. That money will be used to help fund primarily zero emission truck purchases and infrastructure development. In particular for infrastructure, we recognize that this is a key constraint to converting to zero emission technologies. The supporting charging and hydrogen fueling infrastructure doesn't exist today, and it will be needed throughout the region to support operations. The Port of Long Beach recently completed a public truck charging and fueling assessment for our port and the immediately adjacent area, and that report was completed in September of last year. The study is a guidance document that helps us to identify opportunities and challenges with deploying public charging and fueling near the port, and it establishes a framework that we can use to evaluate potential charging and fueling sites going forward. In addition, we identified potential sites in and around the port that could be used for siting public charging infrastructure, and we moved forward in February of this year with a request for information for truck charging facilities to give us information on what would be necessary to develop sites in the port as public charging facilities. our goal is to use the information that we received through that request for information and move forward with leases for facilities. But the majority of the charging and fueling that needs to take place to support the drayage operations will not occur within the port. We don't have the land space to be able to support that. And this really needs to be a regional challenge that we come together and look at ways that we can build out the infrastructure at trucking facilities and also publicly accessible sites along major corridors throughout the region. Beyond the port-specific efforts, we're engaged in other efforts as well. We're located in California, which is known for having very progressive and proactive environmental regulations. Bill mentioned some of the activities that the state is involved with for new regulations addressing trucks. And a lot of the efforts that they have are to be very proactive in addressing climate change impacts and moving towards zero emissions. With the manufacturing requirement that Bill mentioned, that will help us to produce more numbers of zero emission trucks into the future. And the state is currently working on their advanced clean fleet regulation, which will help to bring in-use requirements for trucks to be zero emissions to continue their operations. In the current draft of the regulation, the state is looking for drayage trucks to transition to zero emissions by 2035. And this would essentially serve as a backstop to the efforts that are underway at the ports. Also critical is the availability of grant funding to support the transition to zero emission trucks. And significant funding has been made available and is continuing to be expected in the coming years, but a lot of funding will be needed to support this transition. The cost for these new trucks is significantly more than the industry is used to paying. On average, we're seeing costs of around $350,000 each, and that's compared to about $60,000 for a used diesel, which the independent owner-operator truck drivers are used to being able to pay. So that's a significant barrier to entry just to come up with the funding for the capital costs. The conversion of the trucks to zero emissions at the San Pedro Bay ports alone is expected to be in the range of 4 to 8 billion more than the cost would be for converting to diesel, and infrastructure would be potentially equivalent or maybe greater to build out throughout the region. And finally, workforce development will be critical to support the transition. We need workers that can operate the new technologies, service them, and install the infrastructure. And as a part of our demonstration projects, the port has included evaluation of existing training programs to identify gaps for implementing the new technologies. And we've supported electrical apprenticeship programs and specialized certifications for installing the electrical infrastructure. And we've advocated for additional state funding to financially support development and implementation of training programs to support the transition of these new technologies. All of these components will be key to helping us be successful in achieving our zero emission goals. The drive to zero presents greater challenges than we've faced in the past with our clean air programs. And the significant cost and transition to a new technology platform should not be underestimated. But the cost of not moving forward is too great, and we need to take action to address climate change and reduce our impacts. So at the Port of Long Beach, we're making this change. Thank you for your time and allowing me to participate today.
Yeah, it's been fantastic to have you, Heather, and thanks so much for taking us on the journey you've been through, not only cleaning up diesel vehicles, but then going on and cleaning up and looking at zero emission vehicles. It is a massive task, and you're well on the way to working through that. So that's fantastic. I'm going to take a couple of questions here. I can see that Mark's got his hand up. Mark, have you got a question?
Yeah, thanks, Heather. That was really interesting. One of the things you mentioned was a $10 per TEU port fee that zero emission vehicles get an exemption for. I was just particularly interested in, we don't have very many punitive measures here in Australia for those sort of things, and they're politically unappetizing, unfortunately. I'm wondering how the industry, the truck industry, reacted to that, and how you maybe got around those objections.
Yeah, so I mentioned that's probably the most controversial thing that we've done. That was not easy. Even at $10 a TEU, we first started discussing the concept of a rate on trucks probably in 2015. And we just moved forward with implementing it this April. It was a long journey working with lots of stakeholders, we went through economic assessments, we went through a lot of studies and analysis, a lot of outreach, and it was a difficult task to get to that point. Quite frankly, I don't think it came without consequences either. There were a lot of concerns in moving forward with the rate. We had originally proposed to move forward with it in 2020, right when COVID was hitting. And because of the concerns about moving forward with something like that, coupled with all the other uncertainties that we were facing, we actually delayed implementation for a couple of years. And as a result, now we're facing some local regulatory activity by our local air district that I think was sparked in part because of the delay in moving forward with the rate. And so it's been a pretty controversial and difficult task, but I do think that it is now that we've been able to implement it. It's been operating very smoothly. We haven't had any real hiccups in the implementation. The entities that pay the rate are the cargo owners. One of the concerns that we had was whether or not that rate would be pushed onto the drivers of the trucks that are in the worst position to be able to shoulder those types of additional expenses. And so it really does appear to be targeting in the right place, and it is being paid by the cargo owners. And the funding is on track to generate the type of funds that we were hoping to be able to generate through this, that on its own will not be enough to pay for the entire transition, but it will definitely help. So $90 million a year going forward can help us buy a lot of trucks and put in a lot of infrastructure. So yeah, there's a lot to that. It's been a long journey, like I said.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. That's excellent. And Andrew, one port operator to another. Have you got a question for Heather?
Yes, thank you very much, Heather. That was a wonderful presentation. I mean, obviously the Port of Los Angeles is a hell of a lot, or sorry, the Port of Long Beach is a hell of a lot bigger than this port, and you quoted the numbers here. Actually, you're about 200,000 TEUs out, but we won't worry about that. It's neither here nor there. I wanted to ask you two questions. Firstly, do you own the roads that service the port, or does the local municipality or state government own the roads, and do you have some control over them? That's the first question. The second question is, you didn't mention cargo handling equipment. You did say that they were a major generator of emissions, and a study that we did some years ago indicated that cargo handling equipment here is actually the biggest contributor to emissions on our port, and that's even compared to trucks and certainly compared to rail. So I was curious about what you were doing in relation to cargo handling equipment and whether you're seeing the same comparative contributions that we saw now, albeit our data is about 10 years old, but I very much doubt that it's changed much in that time.
Right. So your first question about the roads and the ownership of the roads. So we do not own the roads. Those are local or state resources, but we do have a harbor district boundary that we're responsible for. And so the way that we were able to move forward with our fee that we had adopted back in 2008 and our Clean Truck Fund rate and our Port Drayage Truck Registry is about controlling the access within our harbor district. And so we adopted a tariff that applies within our harbor district. And so to be able to service the terminals, the trucks that enter and exit the harbor district have to be registered in our port drayage truck registry and meet certain requirements. So that's how we were able to move forward with those requirements without owning the roads outside of the port. We are responsible for the roads within the port. For cargo handling equipment, this has also been a really active area for us. We're actually more involved directly in the demonstration projects on cargo handling equipment than with the on-road trucks, and we work really closely with our terminal operators. We're currently implementing several different zero emission cargo handling equipment demonstration projects looking at battery electric technologies primarily. We're also trying to move forward with some hydrogen fuel cells, but those have been a little bit further behind. We also have a nearly entirely electrified automated terminal in the Port of Long Beach. That's our Middle Harbor terminal. And it uses electrified equipment on almost all of the terminal operations, with the exception of the movement between the back end of the container stacks over to the rail yard, because that equipment operates in the same space as the on-road trucks, which are not automated. And so they need to make sure that they have driver equipment there. And so we're working with them to get zero emission technologies introduced to replace those diesel vehicles that they're using. But that's an area that's been really active for us. It's interesting that you say cargo handling equipment was your largest source of emissions, and it might make a difference based off of what boundary you use for calculating the emissions. So we look at our air basin, the South Coast Air Basin, which goes 200 nautical miles over the ocean, all the way to the boundary of the 5-county area, which is a huge area in Southern California where we are. And so we track the locomotives and the trucks to the basin boundary, or the first point of rest. We track the ships coming in from 200 miles off of the coast, and all the operations of hovercraft and cargo handling equipment in the port. Cargo handling equipment, despite the level of activity that we're involved with, is actually our smallest source of emissions, but it's also the area where we have the most ability to control what type of equipment gets brought in through our leases with the terminal operators. And so it's a very active area for us. But, you know, every port is different. You've seen one port, and all of us have different challenges. But we've been very actively engaged in trying to transition cargo handling equipment by 2030.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Heather. And it's interesting how you talk about where you throw your boundary as to what your result's going to be. And I think that's something that's really important as we think about these sorts of elements more as we go forward. Look, thank you so much for that. In the interest of time, we do have one more question, but I'm going to move that on. So I'm not sure if Noel might be able to pop that in the chat, and we will get to it. But I do want to bring Lauren in again. You know, she's as part of the QTLC, has been on a mission to improve freight in Queensland for the last 15 years or so, and the council has been continues to be independent with no alignment to suppliers or agencies, and simply exists to help the industry collaborate to accelerate improvements in freight and logistics. And today is another one of those moments. Lauren is going to open up an exciting collaborative opportunity to you all, and I'd love for Lauren to tell us a bit more about that.
Thanks, Nathan. And it's exciting to be able to talk to so many people today that are already on a long journey and have learned all the difficult lessons that I don't want Queensland freight hubs to have to go through. So to be able to launch straight from maybe some of those emission standards to potentially ZEVs is a pretty exciting place to be in for Queensland. Also to hear Mark's report, the QTLC report into the barriers, because if we're to have any success in this journey, then understanding fleet operators and maintainers, their barriers and their mindset and where they've got burnt and what they need to be convinced of to switch is imperative. So look, everyone loves a report. I love ours. And as Mark has explained, it's full of those great insights and good information about what is needed to make the change, right from the people who are there. But as you've heard, they need to be convinced of the journey. They need to know the infrastructure behind it, that it's there, that it is scalable at one vehicle to 100 to 1,000. They need to know that they can repair and maintain it. They need to know the costs. At the same time, what we've heard around the world from Bill, and it's being echoed in all the reports on ZEVs, is that particularly here in Queensland, what is the likely potential and what is actually being purchased is such a small amount. So even though we've got all these reports which are saying that from a total cost of ownership, it makes sense now to shift, people aren't shifting. So we've got a significant job ahead. We know that from the report, we know that there's a couple of duty cycles that make sense now eminently, and we've got models available to deploy those. But I think for me, what the really exciting part of that report is that it did outline those accelerator opportunities. The first accelerator opportunity was about those kickstart programs and launch pads, and government has a significant role to play there. We've got ARENA here today, they'll talk later, and we've also got TMR with an action and a strategy to leverage. So we want to put the hard word on them about what else that they're going to provide, but certainly ARENA will document and talk to the many millions of dollars that they've got for fleets to change over this year. But we looked at the second accelerator opportunity, and it is about working with freight precincts and hubs as a logical nexus for ZEV trucks, and this to us makes sense because there's already large flows of traffic there. You've got lots of customers, multiple fleets coming in and out. You're connected to those other hubs, which we know is important from a ZEV perspective. And also from talking to a lot of you've got, quite good carbon targets and a desire and a motivation to move now. So for QTLC as an organisation, we wanted to put our push behind these precincts as accelerators. We want to help you to set the stage for the early adopters and those leader fleets. So to us, the other exciting thing that we have behind us is that the relationships. We can bring people from across the world to you. We can talk to each and every one of you to understand your journey, but we can also use our independence and relationships with the likes of OEMs, with transport operators, with energy markets to bolster what we know is already coming. So to that end, today, QTLC is announcing a funding package, and it's designed to assist freight hubs to fund movement who've actually already done this work successfully for the Australian bus industry, to work with 3 freight hubs in Queensland, and that's to develop a tailored program to suit your business. Now, this might be working with your fleets and customers on, looking at truck data, numbers, routes, types, to do some sort of a needs analysis for transition, or for filling that information gap and talking to your fleets and customers about the role that ZEVs play and unpacking the total cost of ownership work that we've already done. Importantly, we really want you to start thinking about the infrastructure needs and what that is at small and then at scale. So for us, bringing those people and experts to you to start doing that with some case studies. So we also, our design is to bring in people like ARENA, and you'll hear why shortly. They've got a significant funding package that is available until the end of the year. And people like TMR, we want to certainly build cases for them to continue to fund this as well. So we want to stitch everyone together, maximise the funding, increase those case studies and the awareness, and boost and accelerate our journey. We've also spoken to the OEMs who have models that are available now, the likes of Sea Electric and Volvo, and they have provided all their in-principle support to bring along their vehicles to any drive days that we may want to host with your customers at your site or somewhere else. So we know from talking to the fleets that is an all-important part of the journey, is the touch and feel and drive of that vehicle. So we can do that for you. At $6,500 just for that initial needs analysis, I'm the first to admit that the funding that we're providing is really modest, but we also feel that it's a vital part of your journey to bring those fleets and the discussions along. And we want you to do that in the safe hands of Mark and Nathan. We want you to be cognizant of all the funding and grant packages that are available, and we've documented all of those. So we want your fleets to get that rather than getting a sales pitch. And we think that the collaboration and talking to the likes of Port of Long Beach and CalStart and those others is a really vital part of the journey. So that's what we're offering today. So who's available for the EOI and funding? Ultimately, if you are a logistics centre for freight in Queensland and you've probably got a couple of companies' fleets running through your business, if you want to start a journey to zero and you're keen to maximise and collaborate with others, this is the funding package for you. Obviously, as an independent provider, we want to capture some learnings through that process, and we'll look to de-identify those in a report. But for us, it's about accelerating the journey also for others that aren't so lucky to be in this position. So
Lauren,
if you're keen.
I just pause you there. I'm not sure if everybody's seeing your slides moving on. So I think you're up to about slide 8 right now, the who's. And I'm not sure if everybody else is seeing that, but I'm not.
Ah.
Yeah, I think it's been on the title slide throughout. Apologies, but it may be the way it's being shared.
It may be.
Yeah. So apologies for that. So there is a slide pack, and we were working through those slides there. But I think if you were to pick up on the who slide, we've got a good gist as to what. If you maybe
seeing it now, Nathan?
No, I think if you unshare, reshare, and reshare the screen rather than the presentation, we might end up with that. There we go. That's looking better. And if you come on the who slide or the what slide and just take us from there.
Yeah, so as I was saying, if you are based in Queensland, you're a logistics hub, you've got multiple fleets running through your business, then you are ideally placed to take advantage of this small but important funding, and we are keen to hear from you. If you're keen to be involved, the process isn't an onerous one. We've got a couple of simple questions that we've set up, and we're asking you to return and respond back to those questions by the 30th of June. So it's about a fortnight. We'll make those questions available to you at the end of the webinar. If you want to chat or learn more, drop me a line or give me a bell, and we'll talk through those. But in essence, this is an incredibly important journey that we want to assist you on. There are lots of people already doing fantastic things overseas. There are lots of templates and resources that have been made available, and we think that through collaboration as ports and freight hubs, that's an important part of the journey that we can assist with. In closing, on behalf of QTLC, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us, particularly the overseas speakers here today. And from my perspective, whether you ultimately decide to join in this project and the EOI process or not, QTLC is keen to facilitate safe, efficient and sustainable transport. So if you want to drop me a line on anything else, I'm keen to discuss it. If you want to talk technical, Nathan and Mark are your guys, and we'll leave you with those phone numbers, and I'll hand back over to Nathan now.
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. That's great. We might have had a little bit of a tech disconnect there, but that's okay. I think everybody's gotten the gist about what we're offering today. This freight hub, this collaboration opportunity where a bit of support funding and a bit of early adopter assistance there. What I'll do is, if there are any questions, I get you to make those questions to Lauren over the course of the next little while, and directly. And what we'll do is we'll move on now. We've got Chantel from Arena here with us today, and I'd like to bring Chantel into the conversation and let her just give you a little bit of an insight as to what really Australia's premier organisation for supporting this change from a federal point of view, Arena, are up to at the moment with the Future Fuels Fund and specifically around freight. Chantel, you are on mute at the moment, but we are looking forward to hearing from you.
Great, thanks. And hi, everyone. We've clearly heard a fair bit today about the need for government support. So hopefully I can shed some light on this. Can everyone see my slides?
We can.
Okay, great. So I'm in the business development and transaction team at Arena, and I work on the within the Future Fuels Fund specifically. But I thought I'd just give a little bit of background on Arena first. So ARENA was established by the Australian government in 2012, and our purpose is to support the global transition to net zero emissions by accelerating the pace of pre-commercial innovation. So we do this by providing financial assistance to innovative projects and then sharing that knowledge gained from those projects. So far, we've invested about 1.8 billion of Commonwealth funds across about 618 projects, with about 100 million of this being committed to zero emission vehicle technologies since 2016. So we have about 5 strategic priorities. I won't go through all of them because transport and freight predominantly fits into the budget measure, the Future Fuels Program or Future Fuels Fund. So that's our 5th strategic priority, which is to deliver the budget programs. So Commonwealth funding for transport via ARENA at least has grown over the years. Initially, we only started off with 72 million, then that expanded to 250 million. And now under the Labor government's Driving the Nation policy, this has been increased to 500 million. So I think it's a pretty clear path of growing support. And in terms of the Future Fuel Fund itself, so the fund focuses on investments to address barriers to low emission vehicle uptake, partnering with the private sector through a co-investment model. So far, the fund has committed about 25 million in funding to metropolitan public charges through a competitive round that we undertook last year. So applications are now open for a new ongoing program, the Future Fuels Fund, the Future Fuels Program. And we have just under 128 million available to support fleets in shifting to new zero emission vehicles technology. So the future rounds of the fund are under market consultation and could include public charging and refueling infrastructure, as well as smart charging for households. But obviously, I'll just focus on our current program at the moment, which is most, I suppose, pertinent to the sector right now, particularly. So our current program focus areas, which do get updated, but these will stay in place likely till the end of the year. So the 3 focus areas that we have are integrating or supporting battery electric vehicles into light vehicle fleets, so cars, vans, etc. Integrating battery electric vehicles into heavy vehicle fleets, so trucks, mining haul trucks, etc. And you know, one thing to note on the heavy vehicle fleets is that we're looking to support a range of different industries to decarbonise, and we're also keen to support a range of solutions. So we're really keen to hear all different types of business models, particularly around heavy vehicle fleets, which is obviously most relevant for everyone here. And then the 3rd focus area, which is again, similar heavy vehicle, but around hydrogen vehicles specifically. So we're looking to support integrated hydrogen projects, including hydrogen heavy fuel cell vehicles, hydrogen supply, and enabling hydrogen refueling infrastructure. So in all of these focus areas, the key thing we're looking to support is the enabling infrastructure, so charging or refueling, electrical upgrades to the network. And for light vehicle fleets, we can't provide any direct vehicle, like any funding directly to the vehicles, but for heavy vehicles and especially, hydrogen, given that the economic gap is much higher, we can provide direct funding support to the vehicle itself, as well as the enabling infrastructure. And across all of these projects can be for a single fleet, or they could be for multiple fleets through sort of aggregation, which I guess is more relevant for a precinct, perhaps. In terms of funding, I've put the minimum grant size. There's no maximum grant size, but we do have a minimum grant size requirement, which is about 1 million for focus area 1 and 2 and 5 million for focus area 3. And we typically expect that applicants would contribute roughly 50% in funding as well. So you're looking at a total project cost minimum of $2 million. So, think scale to some degree. So in terms of how the program actually operates, the key features are that it's a 2-stage application process. So there's an expression of interest stage and a full application stage. At each stage, you'll be assessed by a panel, and that panel typically meets on the first Wednesday of every month. So the program is open for applications on a rolling basis, which means that you can apply at any time. As I said, our panel meets on a monthly basis. So if you are successful, you've made it through EOI and the full application stage, then you'll go on to a board approval. And if you're successful, then you'll enter into contract negotiations. Overall, the application process can take anywhere between 4 to 8 months. Just depending. And the great thing about this program particularly is that it's an open program, so ARENA can work collaboratively with applicants, which means even before you submit your EOI application, we can work with you to help draft up your application. We'll certainly be keen to hear your project early on, get a high-level overview to give you some initial feedback early on to assess your fit for the program. But we can also facilitate collaboration between applicants and other organisations and funding bodies. If you need to speak with others around financing or carrying out the projects itself, we can facilitate that collaboration. So in terms of applying, as I said, prior to submitting your EOI application, we would want you to send through a high-level project overview via email to our inbox. I put the email there. And we can provide you some initial feedback and confirm with the fit with the program. And then we'll work with you to develop up your application, but ultimately you'll submit your EOI application via the ARENA grant management system. And I've got a link for that at the end. And then in terms of how we actually assess your project, we have 7 eligibility criteria. This is pretty straightforward. Things like, Modern Slavery Act, are you, what's your ABN, things like that, and confirming that the project involves a renewable energy technology. But the key thing is the merit criteria. So does it meet the program objectives? And those objectives are, how does it help overcome barriers to uptake? How does it optimize grid integration? Does it demonstrate innovative use cases? How does it drive the overall capability of the sector and participating stakeholders? So that's the first merit criteria. The second one is the applicant capability and capacity. Third is project design itself. And fourth is the financial capability of the project or capacity, evidence of funds, etc. And we also try to assess projects on our portfolio-wide basis to make sure that we're having the best, potential impact on the sector. So that's just another thing to keep in mind. And yeah, so I've just put some key links here. So when developing up your application, just make sure to go onto our website. There's a lot of helpful information that provides a lot more detail than that I haven't gone into today, just to save time. So make sure you do go on and check out the guidelines, the frequently asked questions, in developing up your high-level overview.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Chantel.
No worries.
Going to be exciting times and very, very busy goings on at ARENA HQ over the next little while.
Yes, definitely.
I'm not sure if there's any questions that might be coming through for Chantel. I've got one to just kick off there briefly. The heavy vehicle space, both hydrogen and battery electric, as kind of the focus for this team here. Have there been any awarded projects so far within that scope to give a bit of an idea of the sort of thing that might have got up, or are we still in the early stages?
Yeah, so we're still in the early stages. This open program round only kicked off in Feb this year. So, we've been trying to keep chatting with the industry throughout that, but we've only had, I think, 2 heavy vehicle type applications. I don't think we've had any hydrogen applications yet.
Mm-hmm.
But none of those have gotten through the contract negotiation stage, just because it takes quite some time.
And you're working.
Yeah, exactly. But as I said, we're really keen to support a range of different options. So, it's not just a single company who has a range of trucks and it's, decarbonising or switching over those trucks. It could be, for example, a precinct that would see multiple different companies come through their precinct, and how could they provide some enabling infrastructure for those, as an example.
So unique, bang for buck, those kinds of elements are what you're really looking for. And that's great. And I think, that's probably got the wheels turning on quite a few of the participants' minds today. And so thanks for that. I'm not sure if any other questions are popping through, but that's okay. We did spend a bit longer on some of the other question areas, but they know where to find you as well, Chantel. And I'm sure we'll all be talking more over the coming months as we thresh out what the future fuel energy hub space will look like. And so what I was going to do is just hand back to Lauren for a little bit around the next steps following this session, and just where we might be going from here.
Thanks, Nathan. And I think today we've all got a feel for what's going on and where we have to look, and some resources I suspect that everyone will be frantically Googling afterwards to understand what's been built and the timelines and the policies that were behind it and the grants packages and maybe what you're eligible for. But our view is that Queensland has a significant role to play. I think in terms of renewables, particularly, we're a very lucky country. We're certainly going to come under increasing pressure in the next couple of years, I think, as a transport industry to do things. And we think that you as freight precincts and hubs have a significant role to play, given the number of fleets that are traversing your businesses daily. So we want to assist you, have that conversation, increase the knowledge gap that we know exists, whether it's a touch and feel, whether it's a drive day, whether it's getting some data behind what you think you know or you don't know. We want to put you in the safe hands of Mark and Nathan to enable that journey and to accelerate it. So we also want to bring the likes of Chantel and TMR along the journey so that we can boost the amount of grant funding that we know is going to have to also wet the palate of those fleet operators and purchasers who are definitely going to be up for it. A significantly more expensive upfront purchase than if they were transitioning to diesel. So that's the role QTLC wants to play as collaborator. We've definitely got some seed funding for you to get that assistance and to do that initial needs analysis, and we want you to use it. We understand that each of you are completely different and you all at different parts of your journey and your zero emission strategy. So we are very open to allowing you to use that money in a way that works for your businesses and your fleets and your customers. So please do apply. The funding will essentially open today. And like I said, it is not an onerous process. It's a couple of questions telling us about what you're doing and what you might plan to do. We'll roll those up in a couple of weeks on the 30th of June and close that EOI funding and then seek to work with you. But we also want to continue to, I guess, collaborate, because as you've seen, ARENA has a bucket load of funding. Best bang for buck in our mind is with getting these fleet and freight hubs connected, getting that funding in a way. And if we lose that opportunity, I think that would be an awful thing to do. It is open for the year, but it's going to take months to stitch something together. So ultimately, we have a vision that we have connected hubs, and we actually get some movement on this in 2022, because it's going to be a long journey. But the money is there, the will is there, and I think the political drive will only increase in the next couple of years.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Lauren. And thanks for that. Thanks for rounding that off. I think that's exactly where we're at right now. And well, that brings our webinar to a close today. I'd like to thank everyone that's come to here, specifically the speakers who have come from near and far. Thank you all for your questions, and let's have this be the opening of a dialogue with those participants that were around you with QTLC. As mentioned, both QTLC and Movement are here available to discuss whatever arises from today. You're going to get a package of the presentations today, also obviously contacts. So if you did want to reach out to anybody that was around today, you'll also get those following the webinar. And you'll also we'll also be taking a recording of today, as was mentioned at the kickoff, and we will publish that through QTLC for wider access. So if there was somebody that you thought might be interested in the content you saw today, they will be able to get access to it in the near future. And so with that, I'd like to thank you all, wish you a good morning, maybe give you back 5 minutes, that you were otherwise had put, but maybe that's the 5 minutes that you would use to jot down the first thoughts that came out of the session today, and maybe the next steps you'd be interested in taking. So with that, thank you everyone, and have a wonderful rest of the day.